Hello and welcome to the Rask Network. What you're about to hear and see is limited to general financial information only. Please be sure to speak to your financial planner or refer to our financial services guide available at rask.com.au/FSG before acting on the information.
Hello and welcome to the Australian Finance Podcast. I'm your host, Kate Campbell, and today I'm here with my Brain Hacks co-host, Evan Lucas, a behavioural economist, to talk about how YOLO can damage our financial future. And if you don't know what YOLO is, you only live once, which I don't know if that's moved on in the TikTok generation, but that used to be a very popular phrase when I was in school.
Wow, if it was popular in your time.
Yeah, it's probably not. I'm not that old.
No, but I am, and it was popular in my time. So, I don't know, have we actually managed to transcend generations with a really horrible acronym? I don't know, but it is fascinating because I think this episode for me particularly is really big. I've just done, over the last couple of months, 2 main keynote speeches sort of on this, and I want to preempt what we're going to talk about, which is do not underestimate what COVID has done to YOLO. YOLO has probably had the renaissance and why it's probably still going on TikTok, because the impact that it's had on our overall psyche, on our overall behavior and our lifestyle, I know we still can't equate. So I can't wait to go through this episode because there's so much data for me to give to you. But the fact that, again, yeah, you do only live once, that's something that we've always known, but it's...
I think the phrase almost is, I'm hearing a lot more with friends, treat yourself. Or,
yeah.
I'm going to treat myself, or self-care. And so we can justify spending on anything in the name of treating ourselves. And I deserve it.
That last one's great, isn't it? Self-care.
Oh, no. People will sell you anything under the name of self-care.
Yeah.
My argument is often self-care is the things that don't cost much and they aren't very exciting, like looking after your finances, like going for a walk, like seeing your family. They don't always cost that much, but they're very important for you long term.
Yeah. And that is self-care. I'd agree with that. Self-care is not retail therapy.
Yeah.
So that's what we want to talk about with this is that YOLO absolutely can damage your financial future.
Yeah, and when you let the scales tip too far in one direction, because we talk about balancing enjoying the present and putting money aside for our future a lot, but what happens when it goes too far in the present direction?
Yeah, and that is where we want to start. So let me go through what I said with regards to, at the moment, there isn't enough peer-reviewed data to absolutely pinpoint COVID as this issue, but it is certainly growing. And what I mean by that is that particularly in Australia and New Zealand, so if you're listening to this overseas or you're an international that lives here in Australia, it's a little bit different for you from the point of view that in both Oz and New Zealand, the GFC happened, but it didn't really impact us. We were very lucky we had China. And China came to the big white, savior, was buying just incredible bulks of commodities from this country and continued us forward. So we didn't have a recession of the ilk that Europe and the US and the rest of the world really saw. So that generation that I'm talking about here is that if you're basically 50 and under, until COVID, you had never had a major interruption to your choice, to the ability to do what you want, when you want, how you wanted. Choice was something that you just accepted was part and parcel of everyday life. And then COVID came along and stopped it. Because before you're over 50, you would have been about early 20s, maybe in your teens, when the recession we had to have, as Paul Keating called it, happened in 91, 92. And that changes a lot of behavior. And you can see the difference. If you look at people above 50, 55, they're much more conservative with their money. Now, some will argue that's because of the generation of where the point they're at, but it's not that. They grew up in the late 70s, early 80s and 90s where recessions happened quite regularly and money could be taken away like that really quickly. The generations post that in Australia have never experienced that, and then COVID happened. And so YOLO became a really big thing from the point of view that your choice has never been impacted like it had been. Your ability to do things that you wanted for discretionary spending actually moved down the scale, and it was choices in essentials, and that's still happening. So that right now is what's fascinating, because the data shows that our spending patterns are still at 2022 levels, despite the fact we've had 13 rate rises. International travel, for example, is the great one to highlight. It's still expanding. It shouldn't be. It shouldn't be, right? It should be one of the things that we start to give up. We're not giving that up. The idea of spending on self-care, I want to use that term, is clearly still there. Discretionary spending versus essentials, although it's starting to flatline, in fact, slightly decline, it is still at 2022 levels and it's a high above essentials. So that alone tells you that this topic is absolutely core, because we clearly are still thinking that COVID is here and that all the impact that 2020 and 2021 had on our lifestyle was so annoying and so upsetting that we are now trying to make up for it.
Yeah, I think travel's a really interesting one for us to talk about today, because that's really the thing where we're balancing enjoying right now while we can move, while we can explore overseas, while we're not locked down. We can go overseas, we can make memories for the future, but it is spending money that we could invest for our future selves. And it's constantly coming up for me and many people I talk to, is that constant balance between I want to travel and do all this stuff now, but I also want to put money aside for the future. And it's a really interesting example of where we keep coming up against, should I do it now or should I do it in the future?
Yeah, I'm not a great person to ask that question. The reason I say that is that my own biases override me. I remember basically between the ages of 20 and 27, all I cared about was that. Right, all I cared about. I've written about that in my book. I've written about it before. And it is the right time. I'm not saying that's the correct answer, but I would argue that it is the right time, that if you are and have that travel bug, the value that comes with that experience long term is pretty hard to justify not to do it.
And people rarely regret travel, which is why the brands that are selling personal loans and credit cards use that against you, because they know that everyone you talk to is going to say, do the travel thing.
Yeah.
But then when does it become too much that you're traveling for 15 years at the complete expense of your financial future?
Yeah. And so that's the catch, isn't it? So the credit card one is a great point. Do not put travel on a credit card.
Yeah, right. You see them advertising. It says, you deserve this.
Yeah.
All your friends are going. You deserve to go right now to Europe.
Instagram and TikTok is also the next part of this question, because you will see all of your friends having this incredible time in 90 seconds overseas. Don't forget, it's only a 90-second window. It doesn't include all the, the tedious stuff of dragging your clothes around or staying in a really, crappy hotel or whatever it happens to be. So you've got to put some realism behind this concept. The second point is, like with a car loan, a personal loan is not debt that is actually useful. So go on that holiday if it's something you can afford with savings, I would argue, because then you are not impacting that financial freedom future, because you're not having to pay interest, which at the moment is more likely than not to be high single digit, more likely decent double digit interest rates. That is going to smash you, not just for now, but for however long it takes you to pay it off, which could be 5-10 years. Then that's when the travel becomes a problem. That's when YOLO gets in the way. That's when it does impact your financial future. So if you are young and you are listening to this, try and go and work overseas, because then you can actually get paid while you're there to go and do the overseas thing. If you're young and listening to this, go and do a tour that you pay pretty much on a lay-by, not buy now, pay later, not credit cards, that you can afford. Because, as I said, value is different to everyone, and I would argue that the asset transfer value between working and going on that experience using money as that transfer of value is worth it. But that's me, because I've done that, and that's what I know. And I have rose-colored glasses about my gap year. I have rose-colored glasses about my working time in Amsterdam, all of that kind of stuff. I would never change it. Now, the flip side of that, getting back to your point, is that people sit there and go, well, now you're financially further behind. Oh, actually, I'm not. I'd probably argue I'm financially further ahead. The experience was phenomenal because I didn't live off my parents. I learned how to deal with my own money at 18, 19, 20 because I refused to use money from them. So I budgeted, I scrimped, I saved, I did everything I could. So that's also part of the experience.
But at some point you stopped spending all of your disposable income on travel and you started putting some into savings. Otherwise you wouldn't be where you are now.
Yep. And life will do that to you.
Yeah.
So let's get personal. I'm not going to hide it. I met my now wife. Right. So it wasn't just me I had to think about. I had a very significant person in my life that I'm like, hang on, what am I doing here to help my partner?
Was that part of what flipped that switch to start thinking more about future you and future family?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I'm going to ask you the same question in a minute because you're going through that period. Why I say that point is that It's no one thing. You also just get more mature, right? And that's a crap word, sorry. It's not mature. Your life's needs change.
Yeah.
That's a better way of saying it. It's not mature. That's terrible. And you're mature enough at 20. Don't take me as what I said on that. It's more your change in needs.
Yeah.
So
your lifestyle looks different.
Yeah. My YOLO is my family right now. And I would not give it up for anything.
Yeah.
Right? I get more joy now than I think I ever have. But that's not true either, because I know full well that I got incredible joy from the travel I had in my 20s and what have you. It's just that my brain right now is telling me that this is the best point in my life because I do get joy out of my kids much, much more than I think I can remember. But there's emotions to that. There's sociology to that. There's all sorts of other stuff.
Do you think it's become easier to think about your future self when it comes to investing and saving as you've gotten older?
Yeah. And again, so this is what I want to ask you about. Yes, but also don't ever underestimate overriding narcissism. And why I say that is that when you're young, as you should be, the only thing that matters is you. And that's pretty natural because your parents have been basically providing for you constantly. You haven't had to think about anything in your, single digits, early teens, possibly even your late teens, because your parents provide everything for you. And then you're all of a sudden flushed out in the world at 18 and away you go. You don't flick a switch and go, oh, now I'm completely mature and I can look after myself and all that kind of stuff. You don't think about that. I'd argue most psychologists will tell you, and most, physios, most neuroscientists, most sort of surgeons will tell you, the human brain isn't fully developed until 25. So why would we think at 18 that you're ready to go? So yes, as I've got older, it's become easier. But again, the reorientation. So I'm going to ask you. So you've now gone through a period where you've had change. You've finished university, although you've got a little bit left to go.
Nearly there.
But you're almost there.
Yeah.
But you're now at that flip point, right? So you're starting to go through that point where actually I need to start thinking about what my longer term career looks like, what my longer term personal scenario looks at. Now, you are different. I'm going to say this
I'm the weirdo at 19 who was like, I want to be financially independent by 40 and here's my plan.
But that was, yes, and we've spoken about this on this podcast many times before because, again, you've been in a family that has that and all that kind of material. Yeah. But I would still ask that same question because I was a bit the same. Right? I knew at 19 that I needed to start thinking about this, but the way I learned it was to go and throw myself into living overseas and basically learning to budget on, at that time, £77.50 a week, right? So that's how much I was making when I was as a GAP student, but I got free accommodation, free food. Have you found particularly, I actually think the 25 points an interesting one because it is more likely than not you finished university, you're 1, maybe 2 years into the workforce, all of that starting to come through. Have you felt that change?
I think I have been probably since 18 thinking about my financial future and superannuation and putting money aside. So I'm kind of a weird case, but I've probably come to the point where I'm even more putting things aside for the future and different things I want to achieve and different goals. I probably know a little bit more where I want to go, but I also know I just want to have choices and options in the future. And so a lot of my financial decisions are around that and just being kind to my future self. So I'm still investing a bit less now because I'm studying and I've got a few things going on, but I'm still putting money aside for my financial future.
So let's bring it back to YOLO and how I can, so you said that you're always thinking about your financial future. You're always thinking about that future.
Yeah, because it's something I've got happening in the background.
Yeah, I get that.
But then I just...
When's the future?
I don't know. Some of it I'm enjoying now.
Yeah, so that's why I asked the YOLO question.
Yeah, because I'm getting to enjoy the results of things I did at 18 and money I started investing at 18 now that I'm in my mid-20s.
Mm-hmm. Because this gets back to the data. And gets back to what I said at the start. What the data is suggesting, I said, not fully proven yet in the behaviour side, is that people want to start moving their future to today, whether they have not saved or have saved, because the way that they're spending, what they're spending on, and the kinds of materials that they're using, whether that's an experience or an apparel or what happens to be, has not been changed by historically what an economic model would show you, which is that higher interest rates should draw down on domestic demand, should draw down on domestic spending, and it hasn't. And so what I find questionable about the interesting part of this whole thing is that, are we waiting for savings to basically get drained? Because that's starting to happen. The banks are showing the data that shows 40 and under have now basically drained their savings from COVID 2021. Is that going to be the inflection point? And this is why it's an interesting discussion, because is the future now for you, or is the future still coming? And then the next part of that question is that, will the future ever be here? Will you just constantly get into that point, like some people that work in fire, where they get to the RE, they retire early, and actually realize that they don't want to?
I think it's just constant mindset work, Evan, because otherwise you can just keep pushing out the goalpost to something else. You can never really enjoy the present moment because you're so focused on your future goals. And that's something that I'm always working on, to just stay really present. I know things are happening in the background. I know I need to be patient. And I think the YOLO is almost the opposite of patience, because so many of our financial goals we want to reach do require patience as a key ingredient. The investing bit's not that hard. The patience and waiting and just sticking it out and still enjoying what you're doing today is the hard bit. So I think having a YOLO mindset can make you focus more on instant gratification. I want it now. And that makes it really hard to be a long-term investor, because if you get used to having everything right now, how can you invest for a 10 or 20 year time frame?
Yeah. So again, we're not great examples here, are we? Because again, I'm thinking with my biases and with my own personal experiences, is I found it happen naturally. Now, the reason I am hesitant to say that is because I work in an industry and have worked in an industry that, basically thrusts it in my face every day of the week. So surely I should be able to do this. For those of you out there listening that have that exact question that Kate just asked, how do you deal with it? There's so many different ways. Again, what do you relate to? Is it going to the gym? Is it going and training for a marathon? Is it dieting? It's realistically, we're sort of talking about budgeting to some extent here. YOLO is part of your budget, right? And that's fine as long as you've got parameters on it. The art of a budget is to go, it's there to give you parameters like a diet, like training. It can't be too onerous that you can break it and just throw it all in and say, stuff that, I'm done. But it's developing habit. That's what we're saying. A budget is basically a way of saying, here is a structured program to develop a habit to save. Here is a budget to develop a structure to develop a habit of investing. And you and I have spoken about this in early episodes of Brain Hacks around developing that habit, because that's what it comes back down to. There's nothing wrong with YOLO, but if it is hurting your financial future, there is a massive problem with it. So stepping back and going, okay, I know that I'm a spender. How do I start to break that? I know that I'm unhealthy. I need to actually start changing my habits. It's the same principle.
Yeah, and it might change depending on where you are in life. So this year I might be going, I'm going to put all my discretionary income to saving for this big European trip next year. And then after that, I'm going to knuckle down and start saving for a house deposit over the next few years. So you're quite aware that this year is your YOLO year. You're going to put it all into this adventure that's going to be amazing, give you lifelong experiences. But then after that, you're going to sort of bring that back a little bit, put a lot more into your savings, and maybe only spend a smaller portion of your budget on things that you really want to do right now.
Yeah, and don't underestimate the power of lifetime. And so as you heard with Kate and I, we're both very different points in our lives. Time will actually change you anyway. Experience will change you. That opportunity will change you. The difference between being in your 20s, being in your 30s is different. The difference between being in your 20s and being in your 40s is clearly going to be different. So there will be that there. The thing that you can't get back, unfortunately, is making some right decisions earlier on. So by all means, I completely agree with what Kate said. If this year is your experience year, if this year is your YOLO year, go for it. As long as you're fully aware that maybe next year or definitely the year after has to start being your future you year and your future change year. And again, your budget is – the thing I don't like about budgets is that they have finites, right? Starts, finishes. if you can think of your budget as a rolling scenario and it actually is going over a longer time with regards to 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, it starts to become easier. And so again, habit, because habits take ages to develop, unfortunately. I wish they were overnight because then I could be able to just basically switch off gym and come back to gym with an instant. No, it doesn't work like that. It's the same with anything. And mind budgeting, mind control with regards to mentally having the ability to say no on these things, it's all part of the question and the answer.
Yeah. So it's a balance. It's a hard balance. It's not always going to be the same. Sometimes it's going to swing more towards the YOLO at one period of your life. Sometimes it's going to be more about putting money aside for future you, but you can't just live with one of these approaches.
No, you can't. And so I think that's probably where we want to leave it there is we'll move on to, we'll see you for episode 16, touch wood. But remember, there's nothing wrong with YOLO, but YOLO is part of your overall finances, and therefore by all means enjoy it. And the data says that you are, but you do need to think about your financial future, and it's always what we come back to. So great episode, Kate. Thank you for having me in as always.
No worries.
Looking forward to episode 16.
All the resources are in the show notes for this episode, and we'll catch you on the next episode of Brain Hacks.
Thanks for watching this video on the Rask Network. While you're here, don't forget to like and subscribe so you can get videos each and every day on business, finance, investing, and so much more.